Hello, I'm Annabelle Munson, and welcome to the Universal Business Aviation Ops Update webinar and Meetup. I'm your host and moderator for today's session. Today, we're focusing on a global ops update, since it's been several months since we last got together. It includes impactful regulatory news, reopening news from China, plus insights into in-demand destinations like the UK, London, the Caribbean, and Central America. Let's do a quick overview so you know what to expect today. Like I touched on, we're covering quite a bit of territory. We'll do a sweep across the major world regions, hitting the high points of what's new and notable. I'll be sharing highlights from our Universal Aviation China and Asia Pacific teams regarding ops in the region and the latest on the biggest news, which is China's reopening. Plus, we have a special guest speaker with a firsthand insight on the state of ops into China thanks to a recently completed trip into the country. Speaking of what else is new, we have a regulatory update for you, the latest from CBP, news on RSP and global emissions and voluntary carbon offsets. For those of you planning London and UK ops, we have news from our Universal Aviation team regarding UK TCO, UK immigration latest and greatest, and a major world event in May that will greatly impact London operations. Plus, we're doing our annual spring break preview from our Universal Aviation team members in the Caribbean and Costa Rica. Do want to note that we originally had an update from Mexico slated for today as well, but due to a last-minute issue, our speaker could not join, but we'll be sure to enjoy our Mexico team's insights at our next program. Of course, we'll round out the day with your questions. So with that in mind, let me introduce our speakers that are going to help us out with this slate today. Joining us again is Adriel Wilson, Account Manager for Charter Services with deep operational expertise from his days in trip support as a mission advisor. Adriel will cover trend highlights from across the globe and high traffic events that are impacting your missions coming up. Hand in hand with the APEC update, we'll hear directly from an operator who just completed a trip to China from North America. I'm going to welcome Perry Brink, a Part 91 operator and chief pilot for a Fortune 500 organization based out of California. Very happy to bring Perry's firsthand insights to you during the webinar. And then next, Adam Hartley and Laura Everington, representing Global Regulatory Services. They're going to join to cover updates from the regulatory, customs, and sustainability front. Jason Hayward, always a very popular guest, will be with us direct from our Universal Aviation office in the United Kingdom, London Stansted. I'll be welcoming to Universal Aviation locations to give that spring break update I just referenced. Danilo Rosario from our Universal Aviation location in the Dominican Republic, and Oscar Sanchez with Universal Aviation Costa Rica. Very warm welcome to our very full slate of panelists, and let's get rolling along. It's time to refresh on operational insights. Definitely almost every operator I saw at S&D back in January mentioned to me not only that they were excited for when the webinar was coming back, but in addition, their schedules were packed and everything going into the spring and summer for 2023 was busy for them. With that in mind, let's kick off by welcoming Adriel and jump into the ops news section. So Adriel, the floor is yours. I'm going to bring you on Spotlight. Can you get us started with the anticipated seasonal trends for spring break and the summer?
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. We do anticipate an above average volume during the spring break period through Caribbean and Central America. So recommendation is, like always, to plan ahead. It's going to get busy. Get your parking requests and your hotel requests sorted out as soon as you can. So you're not required to, reposition, add legs, add cycles, add costs to your trips. And I know that Oscar and Danilo will expand more on some of those locations, but as well as throughout Central America and South America, traffic is going to remain pretty high in Europe as well, with the peak season probably being between May through October, like it was last year. So if you're planning on going to your Greece, your Mykonos, plan on getting those requests in early, or you will be adding tech stops, reposition legs. Also, with all the peak travel and all the operations, there is an increased chance, like last year, for fuel shortages, staffing shortages at airports. So you're going to have to kind of navigate some of those things and prepare for them as they pop up with these fuel shortages and strikes. So some of those things just to be cognizant of, aware of as you start planning your Europe trips for the summer, your spring break trips for Central America, Latin America.
Got it. Thanks, Adriel. All right, so moving into high traffic event arena, what should we be aware of there?
Well, one thing we saw from the last several high traffic events is that they're being heavily traveled across the board, more so than they have probably in the past as well. And some of the ones coming up, we anticipate having a lot of traffic and some logistical challenges for handlers and airports around that with parking issues, such as the coronation for the king. And I'm sure Jason's excited about this, but the coronation is going to be May 6th. It's going to be a large event. There's going to be slot restrictions, parking shortages, probably some NOTAMs that are released. I'm sure that Jason will expand on that on his section. But after that, there's the Paris Air Show in June 19th through 25th. So we expect some NOTAMs for parking restrictions and just congestion in the area. And hopefully, cross fingers, it doesn't coincide with any ATC strikes in South France or anything like that. Then we have the China Developmental Forum that's taking place in Beijing at the end of March. So with everybody trying to flood back to China, since it's now open, there are probably some big challenges going to coincide with that event.
Got it. So definitely, once again, the refrain of plan ahead as much as possible. But I know that we've discussed this in the past, but some tips for ensuring smooth service delivery during these types of major events, anything that you can offer?
You know, one thing we saw last year, especially as people were ramping up after COVID with staffing shortages and then everybody trying to flood into these locations, handlers had issues providing dedicated line services because they're trying to juggle multiple aircraft at once. So one thing that I really do recommend is utilizing a service like our Universal Air to Ground, which can provide a personalized ground service solution with a dedicated agent to your operations that oversees your specific operations solely. So you kind of have that dedicated attention during these high traffic and then these peak travel events and times. It's one way to ensure that you have that level of service that you are looking for, which has been a challenge in the past for some of these locations during these events. So there's definitely a recommendation I would encourage everybody to look into utilizing.
Got it. All right, thank you. All right, so we've already mentioned this, but I want to touch on a little bit more. Let's talk about China's reopening, which is big news for many flight departments that have a need and a much deferred one to get back into that market. What's the latest?
So China has reopened, which is great news. So some of the entry requirements and that we're looking to have to do is the crew and packs are going to have a valid PCR test. That negative PCR test has to be issued within 48 hours prior to departure to China. Along with that, you have to complete an online customs declaration form, and we can provide a link for that. And that QR code that you get after filling out that customs declaration is only good for 24 hours. So you have to do it within that 24 hours. I recommend doing it right at the deadline of the 24 hours in case you have any issues. You're not pushing up right before departure time. And then one of the big issues I think is going to be that valid China visas are still required. The crews are still valid, but the passengers, for most part, everything that was issued prior to COVID, they're no longer valid. So your passengers are going to have to plan ahead and check with the local consulates in your country to make sure that your pass or your visas are valid or issue new visas. And then the re-entry into the USA, everybody 2 years and older that are coming back from China or Hong Kong or Macau are going to have a COVID PCR test. Sorry, I heard some feedback. They're going to have a COVID PCR test that has to be taken within 2 days of their departure. And then you have to fill out the attestation form. So just be aware, I know we kind of got in the habit of that during COVID, but it's kind of back for these trips coming back from China, Hong Kong, or Macau, or if you've been in those locations within the last 10 days.
Got it. Well, thank you, Adriel. Much appreciated and very good news overall in most respects. And overall, I think we can encapsulate a lot of the issues or challenges to expect is back to the good news that we are all traveling again. and the world is now reopened. So those challenges go along with it.
Yeah.
I did want to set and thank you, Adriel, for all the insights. But since he left off on China, I think that's a great segue for two special features I want to highlight for you regarding China ops. We've gotten so many requests for this over the months. It's really, really great to be able to finally be talking about it. So first, I had the great privilege to work with two key members of our Asia Pacific team last week to create a special edition of this webinar with a keen focus on China's reopening and some general Asia Pacific operating insights and advice. We recorded it just a few days ago. That included two experts from the region, Yini Lin, our Director of Sales for Asia Pacific, and the Interim Managing Director for Universal Aviation China, and Ricky Fang, who's our Operations Manager for Universal Aviation in the region. So they combined to share their insights. And so we recorded it in full. It's a little less than 15 minutes. I'm going to have Lewis drop the link to that recording in the chat here. We'll reference it at the end today as well. And that link is also going to be in the email that we send you tomorrow that has this recording. So if you've got special plans to be and need to be getting back into China and parts of Asia Pacific, I recommend it highly and definitely appreciate the team's effort to get us the latest and greatest. And then additionally, I have something extra special. I am very, very happy to welcome Peter Brink to share his firsthand experiences from a very recent trip to China. I've always wanted to feature a client's POV in the webinar, crew, flight department member, etc. So it's a real pleasure to have Perry be the very first. So Perry, welcome. And I understand you were the first N-registry aircraft owned by a U.S. corporate entity to venture back into China post-COVID. So to get us started, when exactly was your trip to China?
Well, thanks, Annabelle. I appreciate you having me on for this webinar today, and I really appreciate all this. Our trip month, we went for a week, departed February 4th, and came back on.
Oh, suddenly we've lost audio on you, Perry.
Oh, February.
There we are. You're back. You're back. Go right ahead.
Okay. That was our first trip over there.
So just completed here just a few days ago, the February 10th. Excellent. All right. So what should operators know? I mean, what are the things that you want to share about operating into the country?
So pre-departure, I think one of the biggest things, and Ariel touched on it briefly, was crew visas are still valid for everybody, but passenger visas have all been voided. The business visas have all been voided, and so they need to reapply for visas. A lot of our passengers, executives were scrambling last minute to get their visas. The latest thing I heard yesterday from our senior scheduler dispatcher, it was taking 24 days to get visas, and they said it was, as of yesterday, it got reduced down to 12. So that's certainly good news. PCR, Chinese do require a PCR test within 48 hours. They want you to have the printed certificate showing that you've had a negative PCR. For it. They did not ask for hours, but they do require you to have it. The big thing is that from the Chinese Minister of Health, and it's the QR code. So Universal will send you this. You'll get the QR code, and it's essentially you fill this out within 24 hours of arrival. It basically covers your name, where you're staying. They need a point of contact in China, and where have you been for the last 14 days. This needs to be filled out within 24 hours, as I mentioned. And please remember, it's coming into the country and leaving the country. So when you're leaving the country, we were in Beijing and Shenzhen. They're not just asking for Beijing. They want to know what district in Beijing you were at. So they're really trying to track this, I believe, the COVID very carefully throughout China. As far as doing it 24 hours ahead of time, please don't do it 24 hours ahead of time. Do it a lot less than that. We had a 6 a.m. arrival into Beijing. We were on time, and one of the pilots had filled his out for a 6:30 arrival, the 6:30 in the morning. And CJet is open in Beijing, so you go to the business, and I'm sure, as most of you know, you unload the passengers, you prep the airplane, they push it back, they tow you around, they finally park you. It's winter time, so we had to prep the airplane for winter. And by the time we got into the immigration office, it was like 7:10. And the pilot scanned his QR code, and they said, well, 6:30. So it's 24 hours from the time you walk into the customs office. So I wouldn't do it like, pad your time a little bit, maybe a couple hours at least ahead of time on that one.
No, makes sense and good practical advice. So, what can you share about the situation and your experiences on the ground once you were in country?
Like I said, we did Beijing and Shenzhen. So they both opened up a lot. Beijing is certainly come back to life. It's not nowhere near as busy as it was pre-COVID, but they're definitely kicking into full gear. Everything's opened up, all the shops and the hotels and restaurants and everything's kind of up and open up. Shenzhen seemed like it was a little more open, certainly a little more traffic that we're used to. And as far as the hotels go, we stay at the JW in Beijing as well as the one in Shenzhen, and very, very few Westerners still there. As everybody is well aware of, that China just opened up, literally over a month and a half ago. One of the things I would bring up, and it's kind of a little story on this one. So I went for a walk one morning just to get some exercise in Beijing, and I was walking down the street. You all know it's 4 lanes of traffic each way, and after walking for about 10 minutes, it felt a little weird, a little odd, that something was a little different, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then finally, after about 3 or 4 blocks, it dawned on me. So how Beijing, all the traffic comes up to the traffic light. The cars are all there, the light's red, the scooters weave their way between the traffic to the front line. When the light goes green, they take off like a motocross track, and there's smoke and there's noise and there's everything. Well, there's no noise, there's no smoke. They're all electric scooters now, which was, it's silence when they all take off, which was really surprising. I will tell you, this is the first time ever that I've been into Beijing where you could see the city clearly 50 to 100 miles out. It was, in blue skies when you were in town looking up. So it was really surprising on that front, which is very different. So I think they really seem to be adapting to the electric vehicles. Seems like a lot of the cars were electric as well. Customs immigration, just real quickly. So CJET's opened, and it's the standard. We go through the business terminal and it's fine. Shenzhen has not opened up the business terminal yet. I'm sure they'll open it up here shortly. But in the meantime, they're making you go through the main terminal in and out of the country. And I spoke to our agent down there, and they said, you need to pad your time a little bit coming, departing out of Shenzhen, going home. And so I was thinking, maybe 30 minutes. And he said, no, I recommend at least an hour. About time, an hour, going through the main terminal. And it was 3 security passport checks, and we used every bit of that extra hour to get out of. Kind of pre-plan on that a little bit.
Good advice for sure. And then I'm sure this is on everyone's mind. Any health concerns or requirements in particular since they're just reopened?
Yes, Annabelle, just like you mentioned, they've just reopened. Essentially, unfortunately, the Chinese people have been locked up for over 2 years. They opened the floodgates in January. And, speaking to our Universal China agents and other people, everybody pretty much COVID in January by the millions. So my advice to you, bring a mask and wear a mask. There's no mask mandate in China, indoors, outdoors, anywhere. But I will tell you, I'll guesstimate 98% of the population wears masks all the time. Indoors, outdoors, restaurants, hotels, shopping centers, they all wear it. And so I would strongly recommend you wear one too, because the infection rate is still unbelievably high for China.
Got it. Oh, definitely good advice as well on that front. And our China team said the same, that everyone is still masking very aggressively throughout the country. Finally, any last bit of advice for operators making their first trip into China?
Just a couple of things. Reach out to your Universal team, and I will tell you the information I got from Universal China ahead of time was exceptional. From Yini and the whole team over there, they preloaded us with everything we needed to know, because there were a couple of different additional things that the Chinese government had added. But overall, that trip went very, very smoothly. I did ask about the Beijing downtown airport. As a lot of you know, they built a business airport. Not downtown, but they built a business airport in Beijing. And I said, can we operate in and out of there? And apparently since the COVID, they shut it down for international travel and strictly business travel. They're planning on opening it up shortly. And I asked our agent, I think it was Ricky, about an out of there. And his biggest point was, you do operate out of the new business airport once it opens up. You'll taxi in, that's where you stay for the duration. Your passengers get off there, your passengers get on there. So he says operating in and out of there as a crew is a lot faster than the big airport. The drive's a little further. I think he said the big airport was 25 minutes. This one might be 45 minutes. So obviously that's something to take into consideration. Apart from that, once again, the mask thing, please wear your masks. Highly recommended. Last thing you want to do is get COVID and get stuck in China and be left behind. And then reach out to your Universal people, because they're doing an exceptional job over there in China.
Well, Perry, that's awesome to hear. I will be passing on. And I know that Yini, Ricky both passed on how excited they were to have you all come into country, and they're very ready to welcome the rest of you as well that need to make trips into the region. And Perry, thank you again for making this time. I know your schedule is busy and compressed, and you're just back from a major trip. So amazingly refreshing to hear a direct perspective. And just so you all know in the audience, I definitely welcome this kind of input, because back to making this as real as possible and as useful as possible for all of you on their operational front. So thank you very much to Perry, and hopefully you can stay with us for the duration. I think you're popular in the chat here. Looks like you've got a couple questions coming your way. So I will move on from you, Perry, on to our regulatory
Thank you, Annabelle.
team. So I want to welcome in Adam. Welcome. So they're going to give us their latest and greatest insights from the regulatory front.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Annabelle. Can y'all see my screen here?
Yes.
Fantastic. Appreciate the opportunity here. Thank you so much. And what a great panel. That's good information from Perry. Laura Everington and I, if I'm going to do a regulatory presentation, I've always got to bring in Laura Everington, right? Want to talk about a few things this side of the pond, do a couple of updates on U.S. Customs, and then I'll talk a little bit about sustainability and EU LISA, and get you on to the next thing. So with that, we've got some updates with U.S. Customs and some legacy requirements and legacy programs. Laura, I want to walk through these with you real quick. U.S. APIS, there's a couple of things going on with U.S. APIS right now, but first is the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Talk to us a little bit about that and what it entails.
All right. So a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, I believe everybody on the call probably knows what that is, but it is the proposal to the public for a change in regulation. And what this one is going to be, but let me go back and just say this was completely written with the airlines in mind, much like many regulations, aviation regulations. But the public has a chance to comment on this, and the deadline is April 3rd. What it is, it's really a document validation to go along with APIS. It's completely dependent on a document control system and a ticketing system like the airlines have. Obviously completely out of scope for general aviation. And it's also dependent on interactive APIS, which is also tied to the document and ticketing control systems in the airport. So the way the GA industry transmits and transacts with CBP when it comes to APIS is a non-interactive communication. So we don't have each individual process through APIS and then a flight closeout message when everybody's on board. So it's so different. And we need to make sure that we're able to talk about the differences by April 3rd. So we're working, Universal and the other ISPs are working with MBAA to come up with basically a text, some bullet points, so that we can get as many public comments submitted as possible. We'll have some information to send out to our client base. MBAA will send it out to their membership with instructions on, what to say. We want to keep CBP focused on what we're moving towards and what we've been moving towards for many years, and that's single syntax. Right now, commercial APIS, charter APIS and private APIS look quite different. One is a type B or CETA message and the other is XML. We want to take everything out of the commercial airline bucket completely and make all APIS the XML format. That way we want to get as far away from making us look like the commercial industry on the charter side as we possibly can, and single syntax is the answer. And leveraging single syntax will also help with our point commenting on the NPRM.
Nice. So the action items there, Universal is going to be talking to our clients, MBAA will be talking to membership, and looking for all of our members to respond to this NPRM, so that business aviation stays in the business aviation bucket. Got it. We got another legacy program, board overflight exemptions, that have been around for a long time. There's been a lot of change in this program and its process over the past few years, from incredibly detailed to not detailed at all, but there's been kind of a middle ground that CBP has found in that. Give us a little update on the BOE application process and the types of questions that operators may get from CBP.
Okay, so the border overflight exemption application process is all centralized now. It all is submitted to CBP headquarters. Specifically, Diana Sullivan, Eric Rodriguez are managing that. They are both program managers for CBP. It's quite simple now. However, there's a caveat. They are completely focused right now. They've got a task force focused on what they're calling, very strong terminology, illegal charters. But it's really the communication on knowing how to have that transaction with CBP, knowing what to say in the discussion. There's so many things. There's wet leases and dry leases. There's just the leasee versus the leaseor, and is the owner. It's the conversation at this point, and that conversation needs to be had when you're making application for the overflight exemption period. They're going to ask questions now like, who are you? How do you operate? Do you ever carry passengers or cargo for hire? Just it's much more in-depth and detailed now, but it's not a check the boxes and fill in the blanks. It really has to be a discussion. Make them understand who you are and how you operate. And a lot of it also has to do with that discussion on the ground. When the airplane lands and they're having that talk with customs, they're going to start asking more probing questions than they did before. And a lot of it is, again, focused on these illegal charters. They want to make sure that if you are a charter, you've got a up-to-date current Activity Code 3 customs bond. They want to make sure that you're up to date with your CBP and USDA user fees, et cetera. So much more in depth than it used to be.
So the action item takeaway there is, because this conversation may come up, we want to make sure that operators are giving that full 30 to 60 days lead time with customs to make sure that you're doing your renewals on time, because ASAPs are not going to happen.
Absolutely.
Another legacy program that you and I talk about a lot. We have talked about signatory carrier status and program until we're blue in the face over the last 20 years. But there has been a regulatory, I guess we'll call it a regulatory clarification that we really settled on this week with that National Program Manager's Office. Talk through that real quick, Laura, and then we'll come back to why that is such a big deal for operators.
It is. It seems so simple, but it is really a big deal, and it is clarification on something that we've thought to be true for in my career over 30 years. But since the pilot program phase of this program, it was a passenger program only, and I guess the clarification now comes. We learned a lot of things working with the carrier liaison group during COVID and developed that relationship, and it really has brought clarity to a lot of things. And one of the main things is it's not necessarily just a passenger program anymore. If a pilot is a non-US citizen piloting a Part 91 or private aircraft, where all they really require is a B1/B2 visa, then they are eligible to come in with an ESTA under the visa waiver program and take advantage of that program. This is huge. It's actually going to be a game changer. There's a lot of crew swapping and flight cancellations due to visa eligibility and just the backup at the consulates.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that operators are obviously, you have to meet all the other conditions of the visa waiver program. Your operator has to be a signatory carrier. You have to be flying a private on-revenue aircraft. You have to be one of the 40 eligible nationalities. And I think Lewis is going to put a a link there. Thank you, Lewis, in the chat for anybody. But yes, huge game. We talk about feasibility and flexibility. Visa constraints around crew are one of those things that hurts people's flexibility. So we obviously would recommend crew members get visas. That is what we are not recommending, to fly permanently on ESTA, but we want to share that is an option for active crew to utilize. Last one. I know we haven't talked about this very much lately. Just kidding. RSP, Reimbursable Services Program. Laura, tell us where we're at for Universal RSP, and then talk a little bit about how you can help operators as well.
Yeah, as of today, we are approved for 46 ports under our Reimbursable Services Program. And what that means, very high level, RSP allows participants to have access where access wasn't typically available before. So we have the ability to request overtime and pay in advance for clearance services at airports that are typically closed or don't have available hours or monies for overtime after hours.
So for example, a non-pro RSP program a non-program partner, LAX, closes at 11:30. Have wheels on the ground by 11:15 p.m. period. For an RSP program participant, LAX is potentially open 24 hours, and that RSP request can be made and approved based on staffing, which we've seen a high demand from CBP officers who want to fill these requests. We don't have to deal with a lot of denials, correct?
Right. So it's a win-win. The trend over the last few years has been the reduction of overtime hours, which is a pay cut for them. So they welcome this program. So we have the, to your point, using LAX, we would have the ability, because LAX is approved on our RSP, to potentially have services 24 hours there with advance notice. Now, RSP does not guarantee landing rights approval. You still have to go through all of the landing rights process. They can deny landing rights for any reason, just like they can without RSP. So it doesn't guarantee it, but it sure does help. And like I said, it's a win-win. CBP loves the money and we love the flexibility. We can get into those airports that aren't normally open or not open to non-participants.
Universal's thrown our big net out there. Universal's put our, and we will continue to expand our program to create more flexibility for our partners. But we also think that this is just a fundamental tool in the toolbox for operators. At places very important to them, like their home base, to have a sustainable solution. Can you help operators with that type of, get their own programs set up?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a touch point on the 46 approved ports now. We've already submitted our amendment and soon to have 60 approved on our application. But absolutely, Universal is just like as he said, a wide net. You can utilize our services anytime as long as we manage the trip through our Trip Support Services division. However, we highly encourage and offer a service to consult with our client base to obtain RSP on your own at your own home base. And be able to utilize that program in not only your home base, but any other select airports, but then be able to utilize one of the almost soon to be 60 airports of Universal as backup. For instance, if you divert or have to go to some place that you haven't been before and isn't on your application. So just as a safety net, as Adam said, but it's just an incredible program.
RSP can change what's feasible for you, right? So we definitely we will continue to talk about it because it's just that good of a tool.
I want to say one quick thing about these. You keep referring to legacy programs, border overflight exemptions, visa waiver program, and RSP. Although RSP is not legacy, it's only been around since 2015. But if you're not part of these voluntary programs, they're not mandatory. If you're not part of them, ask yourself why. They give you that increased flexibility and that access. Access is key. I can't say that enough.
I know we can't help ourselves. I know. Laura, thank you so much for the update with U.S. Customs and all those important items. I've got a couple other things for our peeps here. Another regulatory issue we've been talking to a lot about. Juan was talking to people at S&D and IOC. EU LISA, although officially delayed, is certainly not going away. So the phase 1 EES of EU LISA is now slated for November of 2023. And the industry kind of best practice, kind of as worked on between the EU LISA Commission, European Commission, NBAA, and EBA for business aviation right now, is to complete your registration, be eligible to comply, and be ready for when this program takes off. I know there's still some back and forth about applicability, but because of a lot of nuance in the European regulatory environment, between changes between member states and potential differences between member states, the best practice advice right now is to get your registration lined up and be ahead of the game there. You can certainly reach out to Universal to work through that process. And last but not least, our global emissions program. I am neck deep with global emissions support for many of our operators and clients who are reporting for EU ETS, UK ETS, Swiss ETS, or CORSIA. If you've been traveling internationally to these regions and you do not know what your carbon footprint is or what your applicability is to these programs, we highly recommend you reach out to at least get your arms around it and understand it. If you've been operating a lot and you're in the middle of a reporting process and you want to know where you're at, certainly reach out to us. But we are very active in the reporting side for the mandatory programs. And then I also want to just highlight our voluntary offset program. So as a piece of your sustainability program for your corporation, for your private operation, as a charter company, there's three pieces to a sustainable position. There's your mandatory offsets, there's SAF, and there's voluntary, or there's not fly the airplane. So there's which we really don't like, number 4. So there's just limited tools out there that people can use to positively affect their carbon footprint. Voluntary carbon offsets are a very simple kind of one-to-one process for people. We do calculations based on the same ETS calculators that we would use for mandatory programs. We can chop it up, customize for you for a special event, all the way through your complete calendar year, whatever you like. You know, that's voluntary, right? So there's a whole lot of flexibility. And if this is something that is interesting to you or something you're hearing about in your flight department, we would love for you to reach out and talk about it. One more thing, we have our Essentials program. So our recurrent training course, Essentials for Business Aviation, Scheduling and Dispatch. We have 2 courses on the books, one for March 14th and 15th, and then another in June. Those are our full 2-day recurrence, 100% virtual. So we would love, if you're looking for recurrent training, to hit us up there and ask any questions or register for a class. And with that, I will send it back to you, Annabelle, and stop sharing.
Thank you, Adam and Laura. Very valuable stuff as always. Glad you are here to help us with that. Needless to say, so keep your questions coming in the chat. Lots of activity there. Good to see. So for now, though, I'm going to switch over to our friend in London. Welcome, Jason. Very good to have you back, and on short notice too. Always so responsive, just like he is for our customers. How much can I butter you up? Can I say more? But it's a pleasure to have you, needless to say, and let's go ahead and jump in. Can you give us an update on the regulatory and compliance items that are currently hot topics? UK TCO, aircraft weight, and security screenings? The floor is yours.
Sure, Annabelle. Well, there are 2 types of Part 135 operator at the moment. There are those that have a TCO and those without. Actually, our special effects people have been hard at work on this. Thanks, Yvonne. Having a UK TCO is a legal requirement, and the CAA cannot issue a permit without a approved TCO in place. There are no workarounds. You've either got one or you do not. So if you don't, we'd urge you to make that application as soon as possible. We've got a guide in our blog to give you a steer. Be warned, though, it can take 2 to 3 months for the entire process to run its course. So I would start making an application without delay. So this next item is a bit of a wait and see, but back in 2008, the European Union, along with the UK, adopted a weight limit above which privately operated corporate jets, crew and passengers would have to be security screened prior to departure. Now, that weight was 45.5 metric tons, which equates to about 100,310 pounds. Back then, that wasn't an issue because a Global Express or a G5 were well below that weight. However, a G650ER and a Global Express 7500 are way over that threshold, meaning that security screening has to be applied. Now, both aircraft have processes that can be applied, so they operate under the 45.5 metric ton threshold, and that's been working very well. But last May, the UK regulators started calling that into question, as there's a single line in their regulations that state a modification is not allowed as a methodology to reduce weight. Now, we've been working hard and lobbying the UK Department for Transport. We've had several meetings with them to run through the processes with both manufacturers and with legal representation. And at the moment, if your Global Express is operating with Service Bulletin 27 or one of the ASC 26 processes to your 650ER, you can continue as you presently are without screening. However, we are awaiting in the next few weeks a decision from the Department of Transport, which will clarify where we will continue to go with that. So a wait and see.
All right. So then, Jason, moving on to the high traffic event front, I understand you have a very significant event coming up, the Coronation of the King on May 6th. What should operators keep in mind around that date?
Thanks, Annabelle. Operation Golden Globe is the code name assigned to the planning of King Charles III's coronation, which is on May 6th. London will be hosting around 120 head of states along with other guests, so expect London to be very busy that week. Now, London airports have a huge amount of capacity, both here at Stansted, RAF Northolt, Farnborough, Luton, etc. But be mindful of things like fuel delays, order your catering well in advance, and be very careful when choosing your hotel, as central London will be subject to some very heavy security and road closures over that weekend period. Back during the Queen's funeral, we saw some crews having to haul their luggage a couple of blocks to get past the security blockades to get to their transport so they could get back to the airport. Again, we've got a blog which we will keep updating, and keep an eye on that for updates.
Excellent. And finally, so updates on customs.
Well, like most of the world, if you are flying directly from China, mainland China to the UK, you will need either a PCR or a lateral flow test prior to arrival. That's that first bit of news. The second one is you may have read that the UK has started to work on a permission to travel scheme, very similar, they say, to the US ESTA program or Adam Hartley's favorite EU LISA. But just be mindful, this is an IT-driven project being run by a government, and they're still outlining the scope of the project and software requirements. This means there's nothing to worry about for now, but we're keeping a very careful eye on this project as it develops. And so more news to come, and we'll make Adam a subject matter expert on that one too, I think.
Needless to say, anything else we can put on Adam, we definitely want to do so. So always useful and on point insights, Jason, much appreciated. So hopefully you can stay with us so we can get some questions in at the end if needed. Thank you. And from here, I'm going to move us into the Caribbean for a spring break update. Bienvenidos a Danny, from our Universal Aviation Dominican Republic office. It's such a pleasure to have you back with us again. And in 2022, the Dominican had just an amazing year when it came to welcoming visitors. What do you have for anyone this year planning a mission to the Dominican during spring break or this early summer period especially?
Hi everyone, welcome again. As you know, Dominican Republic is a very friendly destination. Last minute calls from your department, from your boss, you want to go to the Caribbean, just file a flight plan, and that's it for Part 91. If you are a charter company and you want to come, give us a couple of hours and we'll get you all the permits to land in a commercial flight. For this season, we recommend that this Easter season that you take advantage of the calling us in advance and getting your slots and parking set up. Crew lodging is also important. It's very busy. March, April, especially Punta Cana and La Romana. That would advise to get in advance.
Excellent. So speaking of high traffic areas within the country, what portions are seeing the biggest traffic, and any parking considerations or major congestion to keep in mind?
Well, in the East Coast, Punta Cana, La Romana, NDLR, and NDPC, as you guys know very well, the ramp space are very big. We should have no problem in that area. But if you visiting the North Coast, Puerto Plata and Samaná, NDPP and NDCY, I will recommend that you give us a call as much as you can, because parking is limited. If you're wondering what's going on in the North Coast of the Dominican Republic, you just take a look of the new movie Shotgun Wedding from Jennifer Lopez, and you see that resort. It's an ultra luxury resort, and a lot of big jets going up into the North Coast of the Dominican Republic. So there is a space, but the issue is that big jets are arriving and sometimes get tricky. So give us a heads up and we'll get the parking slot for you and your PPR.
Got it. All right. Good advice. And I think that's definitely a signal that I need to go visit the northern part of the Dominican. So since we last had you on as a guest, Danny, you've continued your expansion and coverage across the Dominican. Where is your newest location and what region does it serve?
Well, it's very, for business traveler, you always get requests to go to Santo Domingo. It's the business capital of the Dominican Republic. And you got two airports. You got Las Americas, which is the big international airport with all the airlines arriving. And then you got our Santo Domingo City, NDJV. We just got our new location inaugurated in December. It's a brand new terminal, FBO. And we can take care of you in and out. 15 minutes is the average time for your passengers to go through customs. And you park right in front of the terminal. It's a business dedicated. It's exclusive by Universal. So next time you got a request to go to Santo Domingo, remember there's two airports. And this one will get a better experience for your business traveler. We got also Santiago. Last year, added MDST right in the middle of the country. That's a cigar country, very famous for all the cigars, factories, and we are also serving Santiago. So we got a grid of the whole country now. So Universal got you covered in Dominican Republic.
Got it. All right. And then I'd like to definitely touch on any major events for the spring and summer that operators should be aware of.
Yes, we got the PGA Tour arriving in Punta Cana, March 20 to 26. A lot of private jets. Should be enough ramp space, but always remember you need to get your accommodations set up for lodging for the cruise, so we can help you on that. Also in La Romana, you got the Sugar Open, which is invitation only for owners in La Romana. A lot of people coming from Florida and all the states from the United States. It's happening in March, at the end of March. And you got the Easter week, which is very popular here, April 7. We'll get all the hotels are going to be fully booked for that weekend. So remember, keep that in mind if you're traveling to the East Coast or any tourist destination in the Dominican Republic. We should get your rooms now.
Excellent advice. And then any final words of advice for those upcoming Caribbean trips?
Well, we always welcome you in the Dominican Republic. If you have problems in any other island, we got 7 airports. I know for sure some islands have limited space for parking. but we can always relocate, and we will welcome you in any of the airports in DR. We make you have a good time here.
Excellent. Thank you, Danny. And a pleasure to have you as always. Hopefully you'll stay with us for some questions as we close. And then I'd like to wrap up with our final guest, Oscar Sanchez from our Costa Rica location. But Oscar, in addition to, as I mentioned before, not only is our representative from Universal Aviation in Costa Rica managing those locations, but in addition, he manages all of our Latin American operations, working in tandem with our teams across Latin America. So lots of experience there, but in particular, a little bit of insight on spring break traffic for Costa Rica. So Oscar, welcome. I know spring break is traditionally a busy time for Costa Rica. So let's start looking at last year's traffic.
Thanks, Annabelle, and hi everyone again. And yes, indeed, we have a very busy season last year for the spring break. Overall, we had like a 20% plus increase in traffic, and that seems to continue the trend this year. So we will have a very busy season this year again with the spring breaks.
Got it. Well, with that in mind, what advice do you have for anyone planning trips into your region for spring break, best practices, ideas for success?
Like Daniel was saying, Annabelle, it's always plan ahead. Parking is becoming an issue here, and it's very challenging during peak season. Now, especially for Liberia, which is our northern airport close to the Guanacaste area, they are doing some works in there, and parking is going to be restricted after March. So again, planning ahead, trying to make all the reservations for hotels and car rentals will be good for you to have a good experience.
Got it. And are there any new customs considerations for visitors or for crew to be aware of?
No new customs considerations, no restrictions. As always, we recommend to use our general aviation terminal in San Jose, which is the best option to avoid, all the crowds and expedite the processes when arriving or departing Costa Rica.
Excellent. And then always good to touch on any supply chain issues that still remain in your region, or everything back to normal, and then especially hotels, services for the aircraft.
Yeah, you may expect some delays at the airport with some services like fuel, terminal delays, may be an issue, especially in Liberia, because we don't have a dedicated facility there.
All right, so keeping those in mind. And then finally, any special events to note that might be adding to traffic congestion?
Yes, we have some fishing tournaments that will occur during the same days for the spring break. So this will add up to the traffic that we will already have. So yes, again, plan ahead and try to make all reservations in advance.
Excellent. Thank you, Oscar. And needless to say, I would love to be having my spring break at your location as well.
You're always welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Oscar will stay with us as well. So from here, as always, and I know we're getting by my clock, I've got 4 minutes left till the hour. So we're going to use that time for your questions. So I'm going to start off with, as usual, I'm going to touch on some of the questions that some of you sent in advance. I do know that we did get to, it looks like a lot of the stuff that was flowing through chat we've been addressing as we go, so there may not be a ton there, but we'll address that in a moment. If you did have any questions you were still holding on to, please drop them into the chat now so we can make sure to triage that with the experts that are here. So let me start with some things that were already pre-submitted. This one for Jason, for specifically, are there any new passenger requirements for flights between the UK and the EU?
No.
Short and to the point. I love it. All right. So I have one for Adriel. So and I know we touched on this again, but maybe just a refresher. Turnaround time for China crew visa. Any advice there specifically? And the question it went into, do you have to provide your primary passport, or can you request that visa using a secondary for your passport?
Yeah, so it depends on the Chinese consulate in your country. Usually takes about 4 to 7 working days to issue the Chinese crew visas. And you have to use the passport which has the valid visa to enter China.
Got it. Makes sense. And thank you for that. This one for you as well, Adriel. Can you recommend a location? This one got really specific for rapid PCR testing in PANC for crews going to China. And then they also, I think we also touched on this, I think in some significant detail already on the declaration, how long before to fill it out, i.e. that 24-hour window, or as Perry recommended,
Yeah.
pad.
Perry trumped me on that one from experience. So yeah, don't do it right at the 24-hour window. Like Perry said, do it, give yourself a buffer time. And then regarding the testing locations in Anchorage, I did put it in the chat. There was 2 locations in there that we have. I'll put it back in there if anybody needs it, or just message me.
Got it.
I'd like to just add something to that. Sorry, that I forgot to mention.
Of course.
When you get the QR code, once you fill out the application, it's instant. It'll pop back instantly on your phone. It's approved. Just for your own safety, take a screenshot of it, because you're going to lose it, and that's the fastest, easiest way to do it.
Good practical advice. Thank you, Perry. Appreciate it. And then I think that the next one as well for you, Adriel. So requirements specifically, I know we touched on requirements for China. Hong Kong and Macau were also a request specific to entry requirements.
Yeah, I posted the link that we have for the Hong Kong requirements. I can go through that at a different point. But for Macau, the entry regulations for passengers and crew, basically no COVID test requirement if you're coming from mainland China to Hong Kong or Taiwan. The entry from Macau from foreign countries, you have to have a negative PCR or antigen test taken within 48 hours of the date of sampling. Negative PCR test results required for entering mainland China via Macau within 7 days of entry. And then there's no COVID test requirement to transit, no COVID test requirement for transit crew and passengers. So if you're tech stopping through and leaving, it says no COVID requirements.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Adriel. Okay, so from here, I don't have any more of the pre-submitted side currently that were sent in advance. Lewis, anything that we need to either highlight that's already been touched on in the chat, but might be great to really bring to the attention of the whole group in case people aren't monitoring chat, as well as any new questions you want to throw out to the experts?
The guys have done a great job of answering questions as they've come in, but we just got one a minute ago about mandatory letters, or I guess sponsor letters is what they're asking, I believe, before traveling to China. Is Adriel, you might want to handle that one. Do you know if that's still required?
I don't know. I know that previously they had to have those, but with China reopening, I don't know if that is required. My suspicion is that that requirement is probably dropped at that point of the reopening, but we'd have to double check.
And then you had a question. Go ahead.
I was going to ask Perry if he had any invitation requirements when he entered China.
To be honest, I don't remember us having that. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check with our scheduling department, but I don't remember us having that one.
Great, thank you. And then Adam, Laura, if one of you want to handle this one, we had the question: if an operator does very little international travel, do you still recommend them applying for their own RSP or just using Universal for our RSP?
It depends on the location. Number one, if we have, if your home base is on Universal's RSP, number one, but few international flights or a lot of international flights, I think everybody wants the maximum flexibility at their home base, if possible. So, again, not something you have to do, but if your airport closes and you find in those few times a year that you're wanting to get in at other times, RSP is an option. We'd be glad to talk about it.
Awesome. I think we're caught up.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, both Lewis and Adam. And then that brings us to our conclusion. I know we're just a few minutes over, but most of you stayed with us, which is awesome. Again, reminder, today's session in full, recording link will be sent out tomorrow on the 23rd. And in addition, I'll make sure there's a link to the full length, 15 minutes or so, of a Asia Pacific China in-depth review directly from our Asia Pacific team. I also host that program, and so I definitely recommend that if that's something that's in your travel plans or that you need to look into. All right, so as far as closing, I think we've covered all the rest. So thank you for all the kudos to our I really appreciate you guys thanking our speakers, because I definitely could not do this without them. Reminders as well, if you have any suggestions for additional topics, email me at operationalinsight@univway.com. Any topics, burning questions, ideas for speakers, definitely welcome. I loved having some of you at S&D come up and talk to me about topics, is perfect. And should you have a really unique trip experience that you want to share, that you would not mind being a guest star here on the webinar like Perry was, do let me know, because as we get topics in, it might be a great segue. And we do love having your firsthand perspective and making it valuable for all your fellow operators. If you have any further questions, reach out to us at the email and look for the link tomorrow. Definitely planning several different webinars coming up here throughout the rest of the spring and into the summer. So keep an eye out for those invitations. And I will hopefully see you again soon, as well as at upcoming events. So take care. Bye for now. And I'll see you in the rest of 2023. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much to our speakers. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks,
guys.
y'all.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.